everyone, it's Shea. Welcome to or back to my channel. If you're new here, I live in Los Angeles, my native language is English, and I'm currently studying Italian. So in today's video, I'm going to go over the first steps you need to take when starting to learn a new language. All these things will be literally day one, fresh start of learning a new language. I'm going to go over why they're important and then end the video with some tips on how you can continue to study after your first week or so of learning a language. If you want to see these tips in action, be sure to check out one of my older videos that I will link down below. It is called Learning French, and it is a video going over what I would do in my first week of learning a new language. So, for example, I chose French and I showed you exactly how I would start to learn French. And while I haven't continued with that because I'm only focusing on Italian, it's a good way to see how I would start learning a new language. Be sure to go watch that video after this one so you can see how I actually used these tips. Let's get right into it. Step number one is, of course, looking up the alphabet and pronunciation of letters or certain combinations of letters. For a language that requires using a different alphabet, I would recommend practicing writing out those letters, but I can't really speak to that too much because I have never personally learned a language that requires learning a new alphabet, so I really can't give much guidance on that, and I don't want to say anything that isn't correct for other languages like that. So these tips are going to be just for languages with the Latin alphabet. My advice for this is actually looking up YouTube videos going over the alphabets and pronunciations. I know there's a lot of resources out there where this will be shown in the beginning of a textbook or an online website, but I think it's a lot better to actually hear this part and not just read how these things are pronounced. So for example, when I started learning Italian before I actually went to Italy, I just wanted to get a sense of how the certain letters and combinations of letters were pronounced. And there were plenty of YouTube videos that had people explaining this and repeating the sounds out loud so you could mimic them and practice them yourselves. Definitely don't put pronunciation off until way later and you think, oh, I'll get around to it once I'm more advanced. Pronunciation is something that you can practice from day one, and I highly recommend that you mimic and try your best to just make the sounds repeatedly, especially if there are some sounds that are very different from your native language. You will have to practice those to kind of rework the way your mouth moves to be able to make those sounds, because the reason why it is so hard is because your mouth and your tongue and everything is not used to the different placements to be able to make those sounds in a language that you're not used to. Once you have these sounds down, you can actually start looking at full words. Step two is to start looking at lists of the most common words and the most common verbs. There are some studies that say if you know 1,000 to 3,000 words of a language, you can understand 80% of that language. While you can't just study 1,000 words and suddenly be able to understand and speak a language fluently, there's a lot more that goes into language learning than just memorizing a bunch of words. It will be really helpful if you start focusing on the most common words, because those will come up the most in your studies, whether you're reading or listening or watching shows, whatever it may be, it's best to focus on these words that you will be hearing most often. Also look at words related to topics that you're actually interested in, because these will be related to books that you may be reading, topics that you want to practice talking about, things about yourself that you want to practice talking about. So definitely don't follow some sort of program or guide if it includes a bunch of words or phrases that you just know you aren't interested in or won't be using very early on. If you want to be able to pick up a lot and also stay interested in the language that you're learning, definitely focus on words that are related to you in some way, whether it's things you like, places you want to go, foods you eat, whatever. Make sure that you're kind of personalizing this language learning journey. So for verbs, you want to focus on verbs like to be, to think, to have, to need, to want, to say, to go, and I will put all of these up on the screen. These are verbs that you will probably use most often, and usually, unfortunately, a lot of these verbs are actually conjugated irregularly, so they won't follow a lot of the conjugation patterns of certain languages. First, try to focus on what they mean, and then you are going to want to learn the present tense conjugation. Just the present tense. There's going to be a lot of different tenses, but don't even bother looking at those yet because you just want to learn the present tense. Look up the conjugations for the present tense for all of these verbs and start practicing writing those out. saying those out loud, and just really commit them to memory. And don't move on to other tenses until you really feel comfortable with the present tense. Obviously, you won't be able to speak about things in the future or things that you did, but it's okay to just practice simple sentences in the present. With the vocabulary and the verbs, these are things that you are going to want to review daily within your first week or more of learning the language. So a good way to do this is the spaced repetition method. Our brains actually learn a lot better and learn a lot more when we space learning out over time. It helps maximize retention, and there are actually some apps that already do this for you, so you don't have to figure out this process yourself. Anki is free and is a really great way to practice flashcards. There's a lot of flashcard sets that are already built out on Anki that you can add to your own deck. I'm not really a fan of the interface of it because it is pretty cut and dry, but obviously things don't have to look really pretty if they're gonna help you learn. I end up using Quizlet a lot more just because that's what I use throughout school, so I'm more accustomed to Quizlet. So Anki and Quizlet are good options for this. Or you can make regular flashcards, but if you want to save paper, it's better to do it digitally. Once you feel pretty good with where you're at with the pronunciation, the alphabet, some simple words and simple verbs, you can start forming very simple sentences. So like I said, keep it very simple. We don't need to be writing huge, long sentences at this point. You can keep it to just like a subject and a verb, a subject, a verb in a location, to a location. Maybe you can use some adjectives that you've learned. Maybe have a list of like all the verbs that you've learned and all of the different words that are important, and then start piecing them together in different sentences. Again, very simple. It doesn't need to be anything too complex. These sentences could be things like, I have a cat. I go to the store. I like this food. I like that. Then maybe you could start building out things like, I go to the store with my mom. So these can be things of sentences that you just keep building on every day until they do become longer, and then maybe you can start writing a short paragraph about something you did. You could write a very short story. Basically, start very simple and keep building and building and building. While you're doing all those things within your first week or 2 or 3 of studying, you also want to be doing things like listening to music, listening to TV shows or YouTube videos, or especially children's movies or children's TV shows. And this isn't necessarily with the goal of understanding it, but more of just hearing the language and getting a lot of exposure to how it sounds. A great thing to do is even mimicking the sounds that you hear. So, you know, I used to love watching Peppa Pig in Italian on YouTube. They have a bunch of just free episodes. Children's shows repeat a lot of the same words, a lot of the same phrases so that kids can learn them. So when you hear those, you can just start repeating those out loud as well. A lot of times I would listen to these shows while I was cleaning or something, so I'd be walking around the house just like mimicking things that Peppa said. So this is a great way to kind of babble and mimic like a baby would, because that's how babies learn languages and get their pronunciation down. Like they're just blah, 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 talking all the time. So just do that too. Just learn a language like a baby would. As far as where to go from there, just keep building on very slowly. Start adding new verb tenses. So the next one, you should probably explore things like the past tense or the perfect tense. Future will come a little bit later, because these are like the core tenses. You could talk about what you did, what you're doing, and what you will do. Start reading more children's stories, start writing some of your own stories, and then build up with a little bit harder stories. Right now, I'm reading an actual like full novel in Italian. Definitely get your speaking practice in, practice introducing yourself. You can write little scripts for yourself and practice saying those out loud or practice with a friend. Also, italki is a great resource if you want to find a tutor, and I will link that down below. And I have lots of other videos with great resources for language learners. Even though I'm learning Italian, I do have some videos on Italian specifically, but most videos I try to make them apply to any language that people are learning. And once you've progressed a little bit further, I do have a 30-day language study plan. So if you have been studying for a while and you're like, okay, well, how do I come up with an actual study schedule? I have one all planned out for you for 30 days. With some break days as well. All the activities are mapped out every day, and it can be used for any language. So go ahead and check that out. I will link that down below. All right, so that is my quick run through of the first steps to take when starting to learn a new language. I hope that you found it helpful. Just remember to keep things simple. Don't rush. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please like and subscribe. Leave any questions in the comments down below, and I will try my best to answer them. I will see you all again very soon. Bye!